They were left on the side of a mountain road with 2 suitcases and a note that said, "We can't afford you anymore." But what Marlowe and Althea discovered in that abandoned forest manor would make their ungrateful children regret every cruel word. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world you are watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The morning started the way most mornings had for the past 2 years. Marlowe Brennan, 78 years old with hands that still remembered how to build things, woke to the sound of whispers filtering through the thin walls of his daughter's house. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew the tone. Sharp, frustrated, the kind of tone that came when people talked about problems they wished would disappear. Beside him, Althea stirred. 76, silver hair pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for 53 years of marriage. Her eyes opened slowly, and in that brief moment before the day took hold, Marlowe saw the woman he'd fallen in love with in 1971. The girl who'd danced with him at a county fair and laughed so hard she'd snorted. But then the whispers grew louder and the present crashed back in. "They're talking about us again," Althea said quietly. Marlowe reached for her hand, their fingers intertwined, weathered and spotted with age, but still fitting together like they always had. "Let them talk," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. Because after 2 years of living in their daughter Quincy's basement, after 2 years of feeling like burdens rather than parents, the talking had worn them down to something small and tired. Marlowe and Althea had raised 4 children in a modest 3-bedroom house in Springfield. He'd worked 42 years as a union carpenter. She'd been a librarian at the elementary school. They weren't rich, but they'd been proud. Proud of the home they'd kept, proud of the kids they'd raised, proud of the life they'd built with calloused hands and careful budgets. But life has a way of humbling pride. When their son Derek lost his business in 2008, they'd refinanced the house to help him. When their daughter Monica got divorced and needed somewhere to live, they'd taken her and the grandkids in for 18 months. When Quincy's husband wanted to start a restaurant, they'd sold their treasured camper and loaned them $35,000. They'd given everything. And when Marlowe's pension got cut and medical bills started piling up after Althea's hip surgery, they'd had nothing left to give themselves. The house had to be sold. The children had discussed it in hushed family meetings Marlowe and Althea weren't invited to. The decision was made without them. Quincy, the youngest at 43, agreed to take them in. The other 3 had excuses. Derek's condo was too small. Monica was still getting back on her feet. Their oldest, Garrett, lived 3 states away and had his own family to worry about. So Marlowe and Althea packed 53 years of marriage into boxes, watched strangers walk through their home during open houses, and moved into a converted storage room in Quincy's basement. That was 2 years ago. At first, Quincy and her husband Preston had been kind, welcoming even, but kindness has a shelf life when it's built on obligation rather than love. Slowly, the warmth cooled. Meals became rushed. Conversations became surface level. Marlowe and Althea started eating dinner earlier to avoid the tension at the family table. They heard things they weren't supposed to hear. Preston complaining about the water bill, Quincy crying on the phone to Monica about how hard it was having them there, the grandkids being told to be quiet because Grandma and Grandpa were sleeping, even at 7 in the evening. Marlowe had tried to help out. He'd fixed the deck, repaired the fence, reorganized the garage. But Preston seemed annoyed rather than grateful, like Marlowe was marking territory in someone else's space. Althea had offered to help with groceries, but Quincy had waved her off with a tight smile. "We've got it, Mum. Don't worry." But they did worry, because they could feel it. The burden they'd become, the weight they carried just by existing. And now, on this cold October morning, Marlowe could hear that weight in the hushed conversation happening upstairs. He pulled himself out of bed, his knee aching the way it did every morning since the accident at work 12 years ago. He dressed slowly, each movement deliberate. Althea sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. "Maybe we should look into assisted living," she said quietly. Marlowe stopped, one arm halfway into his flannel shirt. "With what money?" he asked, not unkindly. Althea didn't answer, because they both knew the answer. Their Social Security barely covered medication. They had $467 in their checking account, and nothing else. They were 78 and 76 years old, and they were trapped. Upstairs, Quincy was scrambling eggs when they emerged from the basement. Her smile was bright, too bright, the kind of brightness that felt rehearsed. "Good morning," she said. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," Althea lied. Preston walked in, car keys jangling in his hand. He nodded at them briefly, grabbed a travel mug, and left without a word. Quincy watched him go, her smile faltering for just a second before snapping back into place. Marlowe exchanged a glance with Althea. Quincy hadn't suggested a family outing in over a year. "That sounds nice," Althea said carefully. "Great," Quincy replied. "Too quickly. We'll leave in an hour." The drive was quiet. Quincy drove, her husband Preston in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone. Marlowe and Althea sat in the back, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to dense forest. The trees were stunning, bursts of orange and gold against a steel-grey sky. Marlowe stared out the window. Something felt wrong. He couldn't name it, but it sat in his chest like a stone. They drove for over an hour, winding up narrow mountain roads. The houses became sparse, then disappeared altogether. Nothing but trees and silence and the occasional deer crossing sign. "Where are we going exactly?" Marlowe asked. "Just a little spot I heard about," Quincy said. "There's a nice lookout point." But her voice was shaking. Another 20 minutes passed. Then Quincy pulled into a rest stop. It wasn't much, just a gravel lot with a couple of picnic tables and an old information board covered in peeling maps. "Let's stretch our legs," Quincy said. They all got out. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Marlowe's breath fogged in front of him. He rubbed his hands together and looked around. There was nothing here. No lookout point, no scenic view. Just trees and an empty parking lot. Quincy went to the trunk and pulled out 2 suitcases. Marlowe recognized them immediately. They were his and Althea's. His stomach dropped. "Quincy, what is this?" Althea asked, her voice barely a whisper. Quincy couldn't look at them. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. Preston stood beside her, jaw clenched, staring at the ground. "We can't do this anymore," Quincy said finally. Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. We just can't." She set the suitcases down on the gravel and placed an envelope on top. "There's money in there," she said. $300, and a list of shelters in the area. I called ahead. They have space. Marlowe felt like he'd been punched. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Althea stepped forward, her face pale. "Quincy, please," she said. "We're your parents." "I know," Quincy sobbed. "I know, and I'm sorry. But Preston's business is failing, and the mortgage is behind, and the kids need braces, and I can't carry everyone anymore." Preston finally spoke, his voice flat. "We talked to your other kids. They agreed this was best." "Best?" Marlowe's voice came out strangled. "You're leaving us on the side of a mountain." Quincy backed toward the car, shaking her head like she was trying to convince herself this was okay. "You'll be fine," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her. "You're resourceful. You always figured things out." Preston followed without another word. The engine started. Marlowe lunged forward. "Quincy, don't do this!" But the car was already moving. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Marlowe stood there, one hand outstretched, watching the taillights disappear around the bend. And then there was nothing. Just silence. Just the wind through the trees and the cold seeping through his jacket. Althea sank onto one of the picnic tables, her face buried in her hands. Marlowe stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. They'd been abandoned, left like garbage on the side of a road. He turned slowly and looked at the suitcases. They were old, battered things they'd used for a vacation to the coast 15 years ago. Beside them, the envelope sat like an accusation. Marlowe picked it up with trembling hands. Inside, exactly $300 in 20s and 10s, and a printed list of homeless shelters, soup kitchens, and senior services. His daughter had Googled how to abandon your parents and printed out the results. Something inside him cracked. He walked to the picnic table and sat beside Althea. She was crying silently, her thin shoulders shaking. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. Marlowe looked around at the empty rest stop, at the dense forest surrounding them, at the sky turning darker as afternoon faded. "We survive," he said quietly, "like we always have." They sat there until the cold became unbearable. Marlowe finally stood, grabbed both suitcases, and looked down the road. They couldn't go back the way they came. Even if they could walk the distance, which they couldn't, there was nothing for them there. The only option was forward. "There's a town eventually," Marlowe said. "Has to be." Althea stood, wiping her eyes. She reached for the smaller suitcase, but Marlowe shook his head. "I got them both. Marlowe, I got them," he repeated, and his tone left no room for argument. They started walking. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead. Within minutes, Marlowe's knee began to throb. Within 10, he was limping. But he didn't stop. Althea walked beside him, her face set in an expression he'd seen before. It was the same look she'd had when she'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for Garrett's college. The same look when she'd nursed Marlowe through his injury. Determination mixed with quiet fury. They walked for an hour. No cars passed. The temperature continued to drop. Marlowe's hands were numb despite being tucked in his jacket pockets. The suitcases felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. "Marlowe, we need to rest," Althea said. He wanted to argue, but his leg was screaming. They found a fallen log just off the road and sat. Marlowe set the suitcases down and flexed his aching fingers. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. In another context, it would have been beautiful. Now it just meant darkness was coming. "We can't be out here at night," Althea said. "I know." Marlowe stood, ignoring the spike of pain in his knee, and grabbed the suitcases again. They continued walking. The road curved and climbed, winding deeper into the forest. Shadows lengthened and merged until everything was twilight. Then Marlowe saw it. "Wait," he said, stopping. Off to the right, nearly hidden by overgrown bushes and young trees, was a driveway. Or what used to be a driveway. It was more like 2 tire tracks with grass growing down the middle. And at the entrance, barely visible, was a rusted mailbox tilted at an angle. Marlowe stared at it. "There's something back there," he said. Althea followed his gaze. "Could be someone's home, or could be abandoned," Marlowe countered. They looked at each other. Then, without another word, they turned down the driveway. The track was rough, full of potholes and fallen branches. They had to walk carefully in the fading light. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches scraping together in the wind. It felt like walking into the mouth of something vast and dark. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. The manor sat in a clearing like something out of a storybook, Tudor style, with steep gabled roofs and decorative half-timbering on cream-coloured walls. It was massive, at least 4,000 square feet, with multiple chimneys and tall windows. Ivy crawled up the sides, and moss clung to the roof tiles. But despite the obvious neglect, the structure looked sound. No broken windows, no collapsed sections. Just a house waiting. Marlowe and Althea stood at the edge of the clearing, staring. "Is this real?" Althea whispered. Marlowe didn't answer. He was too stunned. They approached slowly, almost reverently. The front door was solid wood, with an ornate iron handle. Marlowe reached out and tried it. Locked. He walked around the side, peering through windows. Inside, he could see furniture covered in sheets, a grand staircase, what looked like a chandelier hanging in the foyer. Around back, he found what he was looking for. A window with a crack in one corner, low enough to reach. He looked at Althea. "We're breaking in?" she asked. "We're seeking shelter," Marlowe corrected. He used his elbow wrapped in his jacket to break out the rest of the glass, carefully removed the shards, and climbed through. It wasn't graceful. His knee protested violently, but he made it. Inside, the house was cold and dark. He found the back door and unlocked it from the inside. Althea stepped in, and they stood together in what appeared to be a mudroom. The air was stale, but not unpleasant. There was no smell of rot or mold, just dust and time. Marlowe found a light switch. He flipped it without hope. The lights came on. Both of them jumped. "There's power," Althea breathed. Marlowe flipped the switch off, then on again. The lights responded faithfully. "Someone's paying the electric bill," he said. They moved deeper into the house, turning on lights as they went. The kitchen was huge, with vintage appliances from the 1980s. The stove was avocado green. The refrigerator was running, humming quietly in the silence. The pantry was stocked with canned goods, all expired by decades but sealed and intact. Green beans from 1993, tomato soup from 1987, some bottles of water with labels so faded they were unreadable. "This is impossible," Althea said. But it wasn't impossible. It was right in front of them. They explored the rest of the house slowly, flipping on lights, opening doors. The living room had a massive stone fireplace. The dining room had a table that could seat 12. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs, each one furnished with a bed, dresser, and nightstand. In the master bedroom, they found clothes in the closet. Men's and women's clothes from decades ago, but clean and preserved. Althea pulled out a cardigan. It looked about her size. The bathroom had running water. Marlowe turned on the tap and watched clear, cold water pour out. "Well system," he said, "still working." They went back downstairs and stood in the living room, both of them trying to make sense of what they'd found. "Why would anyone leave this place?" Althea asked. Marlowe didn't have an answer. He walked to the fireplace and knelt down. There was wood stacked neatly in a box beside it, kindling in a smaller basket, matches on the mantel. He built a fire. The wood caught quickly, flames licking up the chimney. Warmth began to spread through the room. Althea sat on the couch, and for the first time since that morning, she allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears from before, but real sobs that shook her whole body. Marlowe sat beside her and pulled her close. They'd been married 53 years. They'd survived Marlowe's accident, Althea's cancer scare in 2006, the death of their parents, financial struggles, and the slow heartbreak of watching their children drift away. But this was different. This was abandonment, betrayal, the kind of wound that didn't heal cleanly. "I'm so tired," Althea whispered. "I know. What did we do wrong?" Marlowe's throat tightened. "Nothing," he said. "We did nothing wrong." They sat by the fire until exhaustion pulled them under. Marlowe grabbed blankets from a chest in the corner, and they lay down on the couch together, wrapped in each other and in wool that smelled like lavender and thyme. Outside, the wind picked up. The first snow of the season began to fall, but inside the manor, Marlowe and Althea were warm. And for the first time in 2 years, they were home. Morning came with pale light filtering through the tall windows. Marlowe woke first, his body aching from the couch. The fire had burned down to embers. He fed it carefully, adding wood until flames returned. "We should look around properly," she said. They spent the morning exploring with clearer eyes. In the kitchen, they found the well pump in a small room off the pantry. It was old but maintained. The water tank had been recently serviced according to a sticker dated 2019. "Someone's been here," Marlowe said. But there were no fresh footprints in the dust. No signs of recent occupation. Just maintenance. In a closet they found cleaning supplies. Under the sink, fresh batteries still in packaging. In the basement, a generator and fuel. "This place is ready for someone," Althea said. "But who?" They found the answer in the library. It was a room they'd missed last night, tucked behind the dining room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls. A desk sat in front of a window overlooking the forest, and on that desk, covered in a thin layer of dust, were papers. Marlowe picked up the top sheet. It was a letter dated June 1987. The letterhead read, "Thaddeus Carmine, Estate Management." Marlowe read aloud. "To the caretaker, continue monthly inspections. Maintain all systems. Keep the house ready. When the time comes, you'll know." "What does that mean?" Althea asked. Marlowe shuffled through more papers. Bills all paid. Maintenance logs going back decades. Inspection reports. Everything documented with meticulous care. And then he found a photograph. It was old, faded to yellows and browns. It showed a man standing in front of this very house. He was maybe 60, with a neat beard and kind eyes. On the back, written in careful script, "Thaddeus Carmine, 1986. Marlowe set it down and looked at Althea. Whoever this Thaddeus was, he wanted someone to find this place. Find it for what? They didn't have an answer, not yet. But as they stood in that library with snow falling outside and warmth from the fire spreading through the house, Marlowe felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. They'd been left to die on a mountain road. Instead, they'd found shelter. And maybe, just maybe, they'd found something more, something worth fighting for. The first full day in the manor, Marlowe and Althea moved through the house with quiet purpose. They weren't guests anymore. They were survivors, and survivors don't wait for permission. Althea started in the kitchen. She opened every cabinet, took inventory of the canned goods. Most were decades old, but canned food could last if the seal held. She found green beans from 1992, chicken soup from 1988, even a jar of pickles from 1983. She tested each can carefully, looking for bulges or rust. Most were fine. In the pantry, she discovered rice in sealed containers, flour in airtight bins, salt, sugar, spices. Someone had stored these things with intention. She found dried beans, lentils, powdered milk, enough to last months if rationed carefully. Marlowe worked on the house itself. He checked every window lock, tested every door. In the mudroom, he found tools. A full set, organized on pegboards like they were waiting for him. Hammers, screwdrivers, wrenches, saws, everything a carpenter would need. In the basement, beside the generator, he found 5-gallon fuel cans. 3 of them were full. He also found boxes of candles, more batteries, blankets sealed in plastic, even a first aid kit that looked recently restocked. "This doesn't make sense," he said aloud. His voice echoed in the basement. The furnace stood silent in the corner, massive and old. He examined it closely. Oil furnace, probably from the 1970s. He checked the tank. Half full. He flipped the switch. The furnace rumbled to life, and within minutes, warm air began flowing through the vents. Upstairs, Althea heard the system kick on. She stood perfectly still in the kitchen, feeling the warmth rise from the floor registers. Tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt warm without having to ask permission or worry about someone else's heating bill. That night, they cooked their first real meal. Marlowe had found a shed out back with chopped firewood stacked neatly under a tarp. The wood was dry, perfect for burning. They used the kitchen stove, which ran on propane. The tank was 3/4 full. Althea opened a can of beef stew, heated it slowly, added some of the dried herbs she'd found. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. They ate at the massive dining room table, sitting at one corner, the rest of the table stretching out empty beside them. "Do you think they're looking for us?" Althea asked quietly. Marlowe chewed slowly. He'd been wondering the same thing. "No," he said finally. "I don't think so." The words hurt to say, hurt worse to believe. But he knew his children. Quincy wouldn't risk someone finding out what she'd done. The others would convince themselves it was for the best. They'd tell each other that Marlowe and Althea were resourceful, that they'd find help, that they'd be fine. Out of sight, out of mind, out of mind, out of guilt. Althea set down her spoon. Her hands were shaking. 53 years, she whispered. We gave them 53 years. Marlowe reached across the corner of the table and took her hand. We gave them life, he said. We gave them everything we had, and maybe that was our mistake. She looked at him sharply. He shook his head. Not the giving. That was right. But we forgot to save something for us. We forgot that we mattered too. The words hung in the air between them. After dinner, they washed dishes together at the big farmhouse sink. Outside the window, snow continued to fall. The forest was disappearing beneath white. Marlowe watched it and felt something shift inside him. They were snowbound now, trapped maybe, but also hidden, protected. That night, they slept in the master bedroom. The bed was enormous, with a thick mattress and heavy quilts. They'd found sheets in a linen closet, still sealed in plastic. Everything in this house was preserved, waiting. Marlowe lay in the dark, listening to Althea breathe beside him. For 2 years, they'd slept in a converted storage room on a mattress on the floor. Before that, they'd slept in the same bed for 51 years. Their bed, in their house, where they belonged. Now they were in a stranger's bed, in a stranger's house. But somehow it felt more like home than Quincy's basement ever had. The next morning, Marlowe woke with purpose. He dressed in warm clothes they'd found in the closet. They fit him well enough. Brown corduroys, a thick wool sweater, work boots that were almost his size. He went outside. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving everything blanketed in white. 8 inches, maybe 10. The air was sharp and clean. His breath fogged in front of him as he walked around the property. The shed was solid, well built. He found more tools inside, a snow shovel, ice melt, even a manual lawnmower. There was a workbench with a vise, and on the wall more equipment. Whoever Thaddeus Carmine was, he'd been prepared. Behind the shed, Marlowe discovered a root cellar built into a small hillside. He opened the heavy door and descended carefully. Inside, more preserved food. Jars of homemade jam, canned vegetables, even some home-canned meat. All labeled with dates from the 1980s. This man was a survivalist, Marlowe muttered, but not a paranoid one. Everything was organized, methodical. This wasn't fear-based hoarding. This was intentional preparation. Back in the house, Althea had been exploring upstairs. She'd found more than just bedrooms. There was a sewing room with a machine that still worked, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a small room that might have been a nursery once, empty except for a rocking chair. And then she found the office. It was at the end of the hall, door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was lined with filing cabinets. A large desk dominated the center, and on that desk sat a typewriter, a lamp, and a stack of papers held down by a smooth riverstone. Althea approached slowly. The papers were letters, dozens of them. She picked up the first one and read, "Dear Mr. Carmine, this is the quarterly report on the estate maintenance. All systems functioning. No issues to report. Awaiting further instruction." It was dated March 1998. The next letter was similar. June 1998. She flipped through them. Every 3 months, like clockwork. Maintenance reports going back years. The most recent was dated October 2023, just last year. Althea's heart began to race. Someone had been maintaining this place until very recently. She opened the filing cabinets. They were full of documents, property deeds, tax records, utility bills, everything filed meticulously. She pulled out a folder labeled Estate Trust. Inside, legal documents. A trust established in 1987 by Thaddeus Carmine. The property and all its contents placed in an irrevocable trust. A lawyer named Sterling Huxley listed as trustee. She kept reading. The trust had specific instructions. The property was to be maintained in perpetuity. If Thaddeus Carmine did not return or make contact for 25 years, the property would transfer to whoever was in lawful occupation at that time. 25 years. She checked the date the trust was established. June 15, 1987. She did the math in her head. Her hands started shaking. The deadline was June 15, 2012. That was already past. Years passed. Which meant the house was in a legal grey area, abandoned but maintained, empty but cared for, waiting for someone to claim it or for someone to return. She ran downstairs, the folder clutched to her chest. Marlowe was building up the fire. "Marlowe," she gasped, "you need to read this." He took the folder. Read slowly, his lips moving slightly the way they did when he was concentrating. When he finished, he looked up at her. "We need to find out more about this Thaddeus Carmine," he said. They spent the rest of the day searching. They went through every drawer, every cabinet, every box in the basement. They found more photographs. Thaddeus Carmine at different ages, always alone. A younger version standing beside a computer in what looked like an office. An older version sitting on the porch of this very house. They found newspaper clippings, one from 1979 about a tech startup in Seattle, Thaddeus Carmine listed as founder. Another from 1983 about the company going public. Thaddeus Carmine, now millionaire, declining to comment. A final article from 1987, small and tucked in the obituary section. Thaddeus Carmine, 58, passed away peacefully. No services planned. Donations to the Nature Conservancy appreciated. Marlowe stared at the obituary. If he died in 87, who's been maintaining this place? That's when they found the journal. It was in the library, tucked between two books on carpentry. A leather-bound journal with a ribbon bookmark. Marlowe opened it carefully. The first entry was dated June 1st, 1987. The handwriting was neat, precise. "Today I became a ghost. The world thinks I'm dead. The lawyers have their instructions. The trust is in place. Now I disappear." Marlowe looked at Althea. His eyes were wide. He faked his death. They read more. "I'm tired of the greed. Tired of distant cousins I've never met calling me uncle. Tired of investment advisors and charity foundations and everyone wanting a piece. I made my money. I lived simply. And when I realized my death would be worth more to others than my life, I decided to die on my own terms. The house is prepared. I've left everything someone might need. The right person will find it. Someone who needs refuge, not riches. Someone who understands that a home is more valuable than money. I'll live abroad, quietly, anonymously. And when the 25 years are up, if no one's claimed the house, maybe I'll return. Or maybe I'll let it go to whoever found it. The house will choose its own owner." Marlowe read the last line 3 times. The house will choose its own owner. He looked around the library, at the books, the desk, the window showing snow-covered forest. "He chose us," Marlowe said quietly. "Somehow, he chose us." Over the next week, Marlowe and Althea fell into a rhythm. They woke with the sun, worked during the day, rested by the fire at night. They were rediscovering each other in the quiet spaces between tasks. Marlowe fixed a loose board on the porch. Althea organized the pantry. Marlowe cleaned the chimney. Althea mended curtains using the sewing machine. They talked more than they had in years. Real conversations, not the whispered exchanges they'd had in Quincy's basement. They talked about their first date, their wedding, the early years when money was tight but life felt full. They talked about their children, the pride they'd felt at graduations, weddings, grandchildren's births. But also the slow fade, the way their kids had started treating them like obligations rather than parents. "When did we become inconvenient?" Althea asked one night. They were sitting by the fire, the room warm and golden. Marlowe thought carefully before answering. "Maybe when we stopped being useful," he said. "Or maybe they were always going to drift away. Kids grow up, build their own lives, forget where they came from. But to leave us on a mountain—" His jaw tightened. "That was cruelty, and I don't forgive it." Althea looked at him. She saw the hurt in his eyes, but also something else. Strength, resolve. "Me neither," she said. The wind howled outside. The house creaked and settled, but they were warm. They were together, and slowly they were healing. 2 weeks into their stay, Marlowe found the map. He was in the library, studying the books on the shelves. Many were about carpentry, woodworking, home repair. Thaddeus had been a man who valued skill and self-sufficiency. One book caught his eye, a Bible, thick and worn. He pulled it from the shelf, and it fell open naturally to a bookmarked page. Tucked inside was a folded piece of paper. Marlowe unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map of the house, crude but detailed. Each room labeled, but one room had been circled in red ink, the library, and in that circle 3 words, "When you're ready." Marlowe's heart began to pound. He studied the map more carefully. There was an X marked in the library, right where the south wall of bookshelves stood. He walked to that wall and examined it closely. The shelves were built in, floor to ceiling, packed with books. He started pulling books out, checking behind them. Nothing. He tried pushing on panels, tapping the wood, listening for hollow sounds. Nothing. Then he noticed something. One section of books was slightly different. The spines were darker, worn more. He pulled them out and immediately saw why. They weren't real books. They were hollow, decorative boxes made to look like books. Behind them the wall was different. It wasn't wood paneling. It was metal, a safe. Marlowe stood perfectly still, staring at it. "Althea!" he called. His voice was shaking. "You need to see this." She came running, stood beside him, looking at the wall safe embedded in the bookshelves. It was old-fashioned. No digital keypad, just a keyhole. Marlowe looked at the fake books he'd removed. Each one had a title: The Art of Living Simply, The Gift of Enough, Wealth of the Soul. Thaddeus was sending a message. "We need to find the key," Marlowe said. They searched for 3 days. They went through every drawer again, checked every pocket of clothing in the closets, looked under mattresses, behind paintings, inside vases. They checked the obvious places and the ridiculous ones. Nothing. Marlowe was getting frustrated. He'd lie awake at night thinking about that safe. What was inside? Money, obviously. But how much? Enough to help them survive? Enough to change their lives? Or was it empty? One last joke from a man who'd faked his own death. On the 4th day, Althea was cleaning the kitchen. She'd been putting it off, but the floor was grimy and it bothered her. She filled a bucket with hot water and soap and got down on her hands and knees. She scrubbed methodically, working her way across the old linoleum. The pattern was faded, geometric shapes in avocado green and harvest gold, very 1970s. When she reached the table, she had to move the chairs. They were heavy, solid wood. She tipped one to slide it aside. Something rattled inside the leg. She stopped, set the chair down carefully, picked it up again and shook it gently. Definitely something inside. She looked closer. The bottom of the leg had a small wooden cap held in place by a single screw. She grabbed a butter knife from the drawer and carefully pried it loose. A key fell onto the floor, brass, old, with an ornate head. Althea picked it up with trembling fingers. "Marlowe!" she called. Her voice was barely a whisper. He came running. She held up the key. Neither of them spoke. They just stared at it. Then they ran to the library. Marlowe's hands shook as he inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. He looked at Althea. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. He turned the key. The lock clicked. The safe door released with a soft hiss, like it had been sealed under pressure. Marlowe pulled it open. Inside was darkness. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw shapes. Rectangular shapes, stacked neatly. He reached in and pulled out the first item. It was a bundle of cash, $100 bills bound with a paper band. He set it aside and reached in again. Another bundle, and another. He kept pulling them out. 20 bundles. 30. 50. Beside the cash, there were other things. Gold bars, small but heavy. Stock certificates in plastic sleeves, bonds, jewelry in velvet bags, and at the very back, a leather portfolio. Marlowe pulled it out, opened it. Inside was a letter. The paper was thick, expensive. The handwriting was the same neat script from the journal. "To whoever finds this," the letter began. Marlowe read aloud, his voice shaking. "If you're reading this, then you've found my refuge. You've survived long enough to search. You've been patient and thorough. That tells me something about who you are. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." The contents of this safe represent my life's work. I started with nothing, built a company in the early days of computing, sold it at the right time, invested wisely, lived simply. And when I realized my wealth was attracting vultures, I chose to disappear. This house was my sanctuary. I maintained it through trusted intermediaries. I left instructions that if I didn't return or make contact for 25 years, everything would transfer to whoever was lawfully occupying the property. That deadline has passed. If you're here, if you've made this your home, then by the terms of the trust, it's yours. The house, the land, and the contents of this safe. I estimate the total value at approximately $390 million. Marlowe stopped reading. The paper fell from his hands. 390 million. He couldn't process it. The numbers were too large, too impossible. Althea had gone white. She gripped the edge of the desk. "That can't be real," she whispered. Marlowe looked back into the safe, at the gold bars, at the stack of stock certificates, companies he recognized. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. All purchased in the early days before anyone knew what they'd become. He picked up one of the certificates. 1,000 shares of Amazon stock purchased in 1997. He didn't know the math, but he knew those shares would be worth millions now. He kept reading the letter. "I have one request. Use it wisely. Don't let it corrupt you. Don't let it make you cruel. Money has a way of revealing who people really are. I hope it reveals the best in you. The house chose you. I trust that choice. There is more information in the portfolio. Legal documents. Contact information for Sterling Huxley, the trustee. He'll help you navigate the transfer. He's been paid well to be patient and discreet. Welcome home, Thaddeus Carmine." Marlowe set the letter down. He looked at Althea. She was crying, but he couldn't tell if they were tears of joy or fear. "What do we do?" she asked. It was the same question she'd asked on the mountain road, when Quincy's car had disappeared, when they'd been abandoned with nothing. Marlowe looked around the library, at the books, the desk, the fire crackling in the fireplace, at the safe standing open with more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. "We think," he said finally. "We think very carefully." That night, they couldn't sleep. They sat in the living room, the leather portfolio on the coffee table between them. Neither of them wanted to touch it. $390 million. The words felt obscene. They'd lived their whole lives scraping by. Marlowe's pension had been $1,600 a month. Althea's Social Security was $1,100. They'd raised 4 children on a carpenter's wages and a librarian's salary. And now they were sitting on more money than everyone in their old neighborhood combined would see in their lifetimes. "We could give it away," Althea said quietly. Marlowe looked at her. "We could," he agreed. "Donate it all. Foundations, charities, people who need it more. She nodded slowly, but her face was conflicted. But, Marlowe prompted. But our children left us to die, she said. Her voice was hard. And if word gets out we have this kind of money, they'll come back. All of them, with apologies and excuses and open hands. Marlowe's jaw clenched. The thought of Quincy showing up, fake tears streaming down her face, claiming she'd been worried sick. Garrett and Monica and Derek all suddenly remembering they had parents. It made him sick. We don't tell them, he said. Althea looked at him sharply. We don't tell anyone, he continued. Not yet. First, we talk to this Sterling Huxley. Find out if this is real. Find out if it's legal. Make sure we're not about to get arrested for squatting. And then? Marlowe stood, walked to the window. Outside, the forest was black. The moon reflected off snow. And then we decide what kind of people we want to be, he said. He turned back to her. Thaddeus said money reveals who you really are. Well, we spent 53 years being generous, giving everything we had to people who threw us away. Maybe it's time we figure out who we are when we don't have to give it all away. Althea stood and walked to him. She took his hands. I don't want to become like them, she said, cruel and selfish. We won't, Marlowe promised. But we also don't have to be martyrs anymore. They stood together at the window. Two people in their 70s, abandoned on a mountain, who'd somehow stumbled into a fortune. It felt like a fairy tale or a curse. They wouldn't know which until they opened that portfolio and stepped into whatever came next. The next morning, Marlowe opened the leather portfolio with steady hands. Inside were more documents than he'd expected. Deeds, titles, investment portfolios, bank account information, and a business card. Sterling Huxley, attorney at law, with a phone number and an email address. Marlowe stared at the card. This was the moment. If they called this number, everything would change. They'd step out of hiding and into whatever legal and financial labyrinth waited for them. But if they didn't call, they'd be squatters sitting on stolen fortune, forever looking over their shoulders. We have to call, Althea said. She'd been reading over his shoulder. Marlowe nodded. But not yet. First, let's understand what we're walking into. They spent the day going through every document in the portfolio. Thaddeus had been meticulous. Each investment was documented with purchase dates, amounts, current estimated values. There were spreadsheets, hand-calculated, showing projected growth. The man had bought Apple stock in 1980, Microsoft in 1986. He'd invested in Google's initial public offering in 2004. Every tech giant, purchased early and held. The real estate alone was staggering. Properties in 3 states, commercial buildings, land, all titled to the trust, all generating rental income that had been reinvested. And the cash, bundles of it in the safe. Marlowe counted it 3 times, $500,000 in hundreds, just sitting there, waiting. By evening they'd tallied everything. Thaddeus's estimate of $390 million wasn't bragging. If anything, it was conservative. Marlowe set down the last document and rubbed his eyes. I used to think $1 million was an impossible amount of money, he said. Something only lottery winners and movie stars had. Althea laughed, but it sounded hollow. We used to celebrate when we had $500 in savings, she said. Now they had $500,000 in a safe and hundreds of millions more on paper. The absurdity of it was almost funny. Almost. Tomorrow, Marlowe said. Tomorrow we call Sterling Huxley. That night, Marlowe had a dream. He was back on the mountain road, watching Quincy's car drive away. But in the dream, he was holding the leather portfolio. And he was laughing. Not cruel laughter, just the laughter of someone who'd survived something impossible. When he woke, the first light of dawn was creeping through the windows. Beside him, Althea was already awake. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified, he admitted. Me too. They got out of bed, dressed, made coffee from the instant crystals they'd found in the pantry, sat at the kitchen table with the business card between them. Marlowe picked up the phone they'd found in the library. It was an old landline, but it had a dial tone. He dialed the number on the card. It rang 3 times, then a voice, older, refined. Huxley Legal Group. Marlowe cleared his throat. "My name is Marlowe Brennan," he said. "I'm calling about the Carmine estate." There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Brennan," the voice said, "I've been waiting 37 years for this call." Sterling Huxley arrived 3 days later. Marlowe and Althea spent those 3 days in a state of nervous preparation. They cleaned the house top to bottom. They organized all the documents from the safe. They rehearsed what they'd say, how they'd explain how they came to be here. Would he believe them? Would he think they'd broken in and stolen everything? Marlowe stood at the window on the 3rd day, watching the driveway. The snow had been plowed recently. Someone was still maintaining the road, just like they'd been maintaining the house. A black town car appeared through the trees. "He's here!" Marlowe called. Althea smoothed her cardigan, the one she'd found in the closet. She'd washed and pressed it. Wanted to look presentable, respectable. The car pulled up to the house. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 70 himself, with silver hair and a wool coat that looked expensive. He carried a leather briefcase. Marlowe opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Huxley? Mr. Brennan?" the man replied. His voice was warm, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. "May I come in?" They sat in the library. It felt appropriate, surrounded by books and the now closed safe. Sterling Huxley set his briefcase on the desk and looked around the room with something like reverence. "I helped Thaddeus design this space," he said quietly. 1985. He wanted a place where he could think, where he could read, where he could hide from the world. "You knew him well?" Althea asked. Sterling nodded. "We were college roommates. Went to University of Washington together in 1966. I went to law school. He went into computers. We stayed friends for 40 years. Until he disappeared," Marlowe said. Sterling smiled sadly. "Until he became a ghost, yes." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "When Thaddeus told me his plan, I thought he was insane. Fake his own death, establish a trust that wouldn't resolve for 25 years. He gestured around the room. "Maintain this house indefinitely until the right people found it." "But you helped him," Marlowe said. "I did, because I understood what he was running from." Sterling leaned back in his chair. Thaddeus made his fortune in the early days of personal computing. He was brilliant, bought into companies no one had heard of. Apple, Microsoft, Cisco Systems. He had an eye for what would matter. "And people noticed," Althea said. Sterling nodded. By the mid-80s, he couldn't go anywhere without being approached. Distant relatives claiming family connections, charities demanding donations, investors wanting his money, women wanting his name. It was suffocating him. So he faked his death. He orchestrated his death, Sterling corrected. "I helped file the paperwork. We paid off the right people, created a death certificate, held a fake cremation. The obituary I wrote myself." "Is that legal?" Marlowe asked. Sterling smiled. In 2012, when the trust deadline passed, Thaddeus's legal death became permanent. Anyone who might have challenged it is gone. He's been legally dead for 37 years. There's no undoing it now. "Where is he?" Althea asked. "Is he still alive?" Sterling's expression became unreadable. "I haven't spoken to Thaddeus since 2003. He called me once from a phone number I couldn't trace. Said he was happy, living in Southeast Asia somewhere, teaching English to children. He asked about the house. And you told him?" "I told him it was waiting," Sterling said. "That the trust was solid. That when the time came, the house would choose its own owner." He paused. "I never told him that I hoped he'd come back. That I missed my friend, because I knew he wouldn't. Thaddeus didn't fake his death to take a vacation. He did it to become someone else entirely." The room was quiet. The fire crackled softly. Sterling cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Now, let's discuss your situation. Tell me how you came to be here." Marlowe and Althea told him everything: the abandonment, the mountain road, the $300 and the list of shelters, finding the manor, breaking in, discovering the safe. Sterling listened without interruption. When they finished, his jaw was tight. "Your children left you to die," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Marlowe replied. Sterling shook his head. "Then they have no claim to what you found here." "None whatsoever." He pulled out documents from his briefcase. The trust was explicit. If Thaddeus Carmine did not return or make contact by June 15, 2012, the property and all assets would transfer to whoever was in lawful occupation. He looked at them over his reading glasses. "You've been here for 3 weeks. You've established residency. You've maintained the property. By the terms of the trust, this is now your home." "Just like that?" Althea asked. "Just like that," Sterling confirmed. He spread papers across the desk. "Deeds, titles, transfer documents. But there are steps we need to take. First, we need to formally document your occupancy, file the appropriate paperwork with the county, establish your legal residence here. Then we need to transfer the assets from the trust to your names." He looked at them seriously. "Once we do this, it becomes public record. The house will be in your names. The property will be yours. And when people search your names, they'll find you own a valuable estate in the Cascade Mountains." Marlowe understood immediately. "Our children will find out." "Time for what?" Marlowe asked. "Time to decide what you want to do," Sterling replied. "With the house, with the money, with your lives." He pulled out more documents. "The liquid assets in the safe are yours immediately. The $500,000 in cash, the gold, the jewelry, that's free and clear. The investments are more complicated. We'll need to transfer them carefully. Avoid triggering tax events. But conservatively, your net worth after taxes and legal fees will be approximately $320 million. Althea made a small sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Sterling smiled gently. "It's more money than most people can imagine. But it's also just paper. Numbers in accounts. What matters is what you do with it." Marlowe leaned forward. "What would you do?" Sterling considered the question carefully. "Thaddeus once told me that wealth is a test. It reveals character. Some people become monsters, some become saints, most become something in between." He looked at both of them. "You've already shown me who you are. You didn't immediately try to sell everything. You didn't call reporters. You didn't look for the fastest way to cash out. You called me, the lawyer, to make sure everything was legal and right." "We're not thieves," Marlowe said. "I know," Sterling replied. "That's why I'm going to help you." Over the next hour, Sterling walked them through the process. The paperwork they'd need to sign, the timelines for asset transfers, the tax implications, the legal protections they could put in place. He also warned them about the dangers. "Once people know you have money, they'll come out of nowhere," he said. "Long-lost friends, charities, investment advisors, scammers, people who will promise you the world and try to steal everything." "What about family?" Althea asked quietly. Sterling's expression hardened, especially family. He pulled out a final document. "I took the liberty of drafting a protection trust. If you sign this, all assets will be held in a revocable family trust. You'll have complete control. But the trust will have provisions. Anyone who challenges your ownership, who attempts to manipulate you, or who demonstrates they abandoned you can be explicitly excluded from any inheritance." He looked at Marlowe. "In other words, if your children come calling with their hands out, you can tell them no. And there's nothing they can do about it." Marlowe looked at Althea. She was staring at the document. "Would that make us cruel?" she asked. Sterling shook his head. "It would make you protected. There's a difference between cruelty and boundaries." Marlowe picked up the pen. Where do we sign? Sterling stayed for 3 days. He worked from the library, making calls, filing documents, setting up accounts. Marlowe and Althea watched in amazement as their lives were quietly transformed by paperwork and phone calls. On the second day, Sterling brought news. "The property is now officially in your names," he said. "Marlowe and Althea Brennan, joint tenants. I've also established the Brennan Family Trust. All liquid assets have been transferred. The investments will take another few weeks, but they're protected." He handed Marlowe a checkbook and a debit card. "This account has $2 million in it for immediate expenses. Consider it your emergency fund." Marlowe stared at the checkbook like it might bite him. That night, after Sterling had gone to bed in one of the guest rooms, Marlowe and Althea sat by the fire. $2 million, Marlowe said, "in a checking account. Like it's nothing." Althea held the checkbook in her lap. The first check was blank. She could write any amount, buy anything, go anywhere. But all she felt was fear. "What if we mess this up?" she asked. "What if we become the kind of people we always hated?" Marlowe took her hand. "Then we stop ourselves. We make rules. We decide right now what kind of people we want to be." He grabbed a notebook from the side table. "Rule 1, he said, writing. "We don't tell the kids. Not yet. Not until we understand what this all means." Althea nodded. "Rule 2, we don't change who we are. We don't buy things we don't need. We don't show off." "Rule 3, Marlowe added. "We help people, really help them. Not with handouts, but with real change." They stayed up late, writing rules for their new life. Simple things, important things, ways to keep themselves grounded when the world tried to spin them away. On the third day, Sterling prepared to leave. He'd done everything he could do remotely. The rest would require time and patience. "You have my number," he said. "Call me any time, day or night. I've waited 37 years for Thaddeus's plan to work. I'm not going to let anything derail it now." He paused at the door. "You remind me of him, you know, Thaddeus. Not the money part, the other part. The part that values peace over profit, home over headlines." He smiled. The house chose well. After Sterling left, the house felt different. It was legally theirs now, their names on the deed, their money in the bank, but somehow it felt heavier. "Responsibility," Marlowe said. "That's what this feeling is." They spent the next week living simply. They still cooked modest meals, still wore the same clothes, still heated only the rooms they used. The money existed in theory, in accounts they could access but couldn't quite believe in. Then the first test came. Marlowe was in the shed organizing tools when he heard a vehicle. Not Sterling's town car, something bigger. He walked around to the front of the house and stopped. A pickup truck sat in the driveway. And standing on the porch, hand raised to knock, was Garrett, their oldest son. He heard the knock, heard Althea answer the door. "Dad?" Garrett's voice was uncertain. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Marlowe forced himself to walk around the shed, to approach the porch, to face his son. Garrett turned. His face was a mix of shock and confusion. "Dad, what is this place?" "Our home," Marlowe said. His voice was cold. Garrett looked between them, his confusion deepening. "Your home? But how? I thought you were at Quincy's." "We were," Althea said. Her voice shook. "Until she left us on the side of a mountain." Garrett's face went pale. "What?" Marlowe climbed the porch steps, stood between Garrett and the door. 3 weeks ago, your sister drove us up here, dropped us off at a rest stop with 2 suitcases and $300, and told us she couldn't afford us anymore." Garrett stumbled back a step. "No, she wouldn't." "She did," Marlowe said, "and then she drove away." Garrett shook his head, but his expression said he believed it. Believed it because he'd probably thought about doing the same thing himself. "How did you find us?" Marlowe asked. "I didn't," Garrett said. "I was looking for the old logging road Dad used to take me on when I was a kid. Saw smoke from your chimney. I thought maybe someone was squatting. He looked at the house, at the well-maintained siding, the clean windows, the organized porch. "This place is incredible," he said. "How did you afford it?" Marlowe felt Althea tense beside him. This was the moment, the first test of their rules. "We got lucky," Marlowe said. "Found it empty. Moved in." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "You can't just move into an abandoned house." "It's not abandoned," Marlowe said. "It's ours, legal and everything." He could see Garrett doing calculations in his head, assessing the value of the house, the land, the possibilities. "Well," Garrett said slowly, "I'm glad you found something. I've been worried about you." Liar, Marlowe thought, but he didn't say it. "Have you talked to Quincy?" Garrett asked. "Does she know you're here?" "No," Althea said firmly, "and we'd like to keep it that way." Garrett frowned. "Mum, I'm sure there was a misunderstanding. Quincy wouldn't just abandon you." "She did," Marlowe repeated. "We were there. You weren't." Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "Look, maybe I should go get her. We can all talk about this." "No," Marlowe said. The word came out harder than he intended. "You want to help? Then don't tell her where we are. Don't tell any of them." Garrett's expression changed, became guarded. "Any of them?" he asked. "You mean your children?" A long silence stretched between them. Wind moved through the trees. Snow began to fall again. Finally Garrett spoke. Marlowe wanted to believe him, wanted to see genuine remorse, but all he saw was a man uncomfortable with his own guilt. "We're fine now," Marlowe said. "We don't need anything from you." Garrett nodded slowly. Then he looked at the house again. His eyes lingered on the windows, the structure, calculating. "If you ever need help with anything," he said, "I'm just a few hours away." "We'll keep that in mind," Althea said. Garrett left. His truck disappeared down the driveway. Marlowe and Althea stood on the porch, watching until the sound of his engine faded completely. Then Marlowe turned to her. "He'll tell the others," he said. "I know," Althea replied. That night they sat by the fire, not speaking, just thinking about what came next. Garrett had seen the house, seen they were safe. Eventually he'd tell Monica, she'd tell Derek. And somehow, some way, Quincy would find out. Marlowe stood and walked to the library, came back with the notebook where they'd written their rules. He grabbed a pen and added a new one. "Rule 7, he wrote. "We don't reward bad behavior, no matter who it comes from." Althea read it and nodded. 2 days later the phone rang. Marlowe answered. It was Monica. "I talked to Garrett," she said. Her voice was tight. "Is it true? Did Quincy really leave you on a mountain?" "Yes," Marlowe said. "Oh my God," Monica breathed. "That's terrible. I had no idea. Why didn't you call me?" "Because you have my number," Marlowe said. "You could have called any time in the last 2 years." Silence. "I've been busy," Monica said finally. "The divorce and the kids and work." "We all have excuses," Marlowe replied. "Quincy's was that she couldn't afford us. What's yours?" "Garrett said you found a house," Monica said, changing the subject. "That you're doing okay." "We're surviving," Marlowe said. He heard her breathe, heard her working up to something. "Dad, I know things haven't been great between us. But you're still my father. If you need help, if you need money or a place to stay, I can figure something out." "We don't need anything," Marlowe said. "Are you sure? Because Garrett said the house looked pretty remote. What about medical care? What about when winter really hits?" "Dad," Monica's voice cracked, "I'm trying here." "Are you?" Marlowe asked. "Or are you trying to ease your guilt?" He heard her suck in a breath. "That's not fair," she said. "None of this is fair," Marlowe replied. "But it's what we have." He hung up before she could respond. His hands were shaking. Althea came to him, wrapped her arms around him. "That was hard," she said. "It was necessary," he replied, but inside he was breaking. Because no matter how angry he was, no matter how justified, these were his children. He'd held them as babies, taught them to ride bikes, walked Monica down the aisle, watched Garrett graduate college, and now he was shutting them out. "Is this who we are?" he asked Althea. "People who cut off their family?" "They cut us off first," she reminded him. "We're just protecting ourselves." But the words felt hollow. That night, Marlowe couldn't sleep. He went to the library, sat at the desk, and pulled out Thaddeus's journal. He'd been reading it in pieces, little glimpses into a man who'd chosen to disappear. He flipped to a section he'd marked. The entry was dated December 1986. "People think wealth brings happiness. It brings choices. But choices reveal character. When someone has to choose between love and money, between family and fortune, you learn who they really are. I've learned this lesson too many times. It's why I'm leaving. Because the people who claim to love me only love what I can give them. And I'm tired of being a bank instead of a person." Marlowe set the journal down. His eyes burned. Thaddeus had been running from the same thing, from family who wanted his money more than they wanted him. And now Marlowe had that money, that test. His children were circling. He could feel it. Garrett's visit wasn't random curiosity. It was reconnaissance. And soon the others would come, with smiles and apologies and carefully worded questions about his financial situation. He thought about the $320 million sitting in accounts, money he'd never asked for, never wanted. That had fallen into his lap because a dead man had been kind. What would Thaddeus do? Marlowe flipped through more entries, looking for guidance, looking for wisdom. He found it in an entry from February 1987. Money doesn't have to corrupt, but it tests everything. Tests your relationships, tests your values, tests whether you can hold on to who you are when the world tells you to become someone else. The trick is to remember that money is a tool, nothing more. It can build or destroy, feed or starve, heal or harm. The choice is yours. Don't let anyone else make it for you. Marlowe closed the journal. He knew what he had to do. The next morning he called Sterling. "I need your help with something," Marlowe said. Sterling listened as Marlowe explained his idea. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. "That's bold," Sterling finally said. "Is it legal?" "Absolutely." "Then help me do it." 3 days later, Marlowe and Althea sat at the kitchen table with a laptop Sterling had sent. On the screen was a website they'd created together, the Carmine Brennan Foundation. Its mission statement was simple: to provide emergency housing, financial support, and legal aid to elderly people who had been abandoned or abused by their families. Althea stared at the screen, at the mission statement, at the application form where people could request help. Marlowe nodded. "And if our children find out about this, if they come asking for money, we can look them in the eye and tell them we're giving it to people who actually deserve it." They launched the website that night. By morning, they had 17 applications. By the end of the week, over 400. Stories poured in from across the country. Elderly parents left in nursing homes and forgotten. Grandparents abandoned by children who'd inherited their houses. Seniors living in cars because they had nowhere else to go. Marlowe and Althea read every single application. They cried over most of them, because each story was a version of their own. And slowly their anger began to transform into something else: purpose. They weren't just wealthy people now. They were people with the power to change lives, to be the help they'd wished existed when Quincy's car had driven away. Sterling helped them hire a small staff, a social worker to vet applications, a lawyer to handle legal issues, an accountant to manage funds. The foundation grew quickly. Within a month, they'd helped 20 families, paid first and last month's rent, covered medical bills, hired lawyers to fight elder abuse cases, and every time they approved an application, every time they sent money to someone who'd been abandoned, Marlowe felt a little more whole. One evening, as they reviewed applications, Althea stopped on one. He read over her shoulder, It was from a woman named Pearl, 74 years old, left at a bus station by her son with $20 and a garbage bag of clothes. Marlowe's jaw clenched. He knew that story. He'd lived that story. Approve it, he said. Full support, housing, medical, legal, everything. Althea clicked the button. Within hours, their team would reach out to Pearl, would help her find a safe place, would make sure she never had to depend on a cruel child again. This is what the money is for, Marlowe said. But even as he said it, he knew the test wasn't over, because somewhere out there, his children were talking, comparing notes, and eventually they'd piece it together. They'd learn about the house, about the money, about the foundation. Not for him, not for Althea, but for what they could get. And when that day came, Marlowe would have to make a choice. Forgiveness or boundaries, mercy or justice, love or self-preservation. He looked at Althea. She was reading another application, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her silver hair catching the firelight. She'd been with him for 53 years. Through poverty and pride, through raising children and burying parents, through abandonment and rescue. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, the way they always had. Spring came slowly to the mountains. Marlowe watched from the porch as snow melted from the trees, revealing green beneath. The forest was waking up. So was he. In the 3 months since they'd started the foundation, they'd helped 87 families. 87 elderly people who'd been abandoned, abused, or forgotten. Each one had a story that mirrored their own. Each one received not just money, but dignity. Pearl, the woman left at a bus station, now lived in a small apartment in Oregon. She sent them letters every week, handwritten on floral stationery, thanking them, telling them about her garden, about the cat she'd adopted, about feeling human again. Marlowe kept every letter in a box in the library, proof that money could do good, that wealth wasn't automatically corrupting, that he and Althea hadn't lost themselves in the fortune they'd found. But the test was coming. He could feel it. Garrett had called twice more, each time with casual questions. How are you doing? Do you need anything? Have you talked to your doctor lately? Questions that seemed caring but felt like fishing. Monica had sent a card, a generic hallmark thing with flowers on the front. Inside she'd written, "Thinking of you. Let's reconnect soon." Derek, their middle son, who they hadn't heard from in over a year, had suddenly started texting. Short messages. "Hey Dad, hope you're well. Saw a cardinal today and thought of you." Marlowe didn't respond to any of it. And Quincy, the daughter who'd left them on a mountain, had been silent, completely silent, which somehow felt more ominous than the other's fake concern. She was making coffee in the kitchen. Real coffee now, not instant. They'd allowed themselves small luxuries, fresh food, a new mattress, books, but nothing flashy, nothing that would change who they were. "I know," Marlowe replied. He was at the table reading applications on the laptop. A couple in Michigan, a grandmother in Texas, a widower in Maine, each one abandoned, each one desperate. He approved all 3. "When do you think they'll come?" Althea asked. "Soon," Marlowe said. "Garrett saw this place 4 months ago. They've had time to investigate, to ask questions around town, to piece things together." He looked up at her. "When they do come, when they show up with their apologies and their excuses, we need to be ready." Althea sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "What if they're sincere?" she asked. "What if they really are sorry?" Marlowe wanted to believe that, wanted to think his children could feel genuine remorse, but he'd seen too much, lived through too much. "Then they'll prove it with actions, not words," he said. "But I'm not holding my breath." The knock came on a Saturday morning in late April. Marlowe was in the shed repairing a chair. He heard the vehicles before he saw them. Multiple cars, engines cutting off, doors slamming. His stomach dropped. He walked around the shed and stopped. 4 cars sat in the driveway. Garrett's truck, Monica's SUV, Derek's sedan, and Quincy's van, the same one that had driven away and left them to die. They were all here, all 4 of his children, their spouses, and most of the grandchildren, standing in a cluster near the porch, staring at the house like they couldn't quite believe it was real. Marlowe's hands clenched into fists. Althea appeared at the front door. She saw them and went pale. Her hand gripped the doorframe. For a moment no one moved. Then Garrett stepped forward. "Dad," he called, "we need to talk." Marlowe didn't respond. Just stood there, 30 feet away, staring at the children he'd raised, the children who'd abandoned him. Quincy was crying, or pretending to cry. Her face was red, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Monica looked uncomfortable. Derek looked angry. "We've been looking for you," Garrett continued. His voice was steady, rehearsed. "We've been worried sick." Marlowe laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. He walked closer, stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "You weren't worried when you left us on a mountain," he said, looking directly at Quincy. "You weren't worried when you drove away with 2 suitcases and $300 and told us you couldn't afford us anymore." Quincy sobbed. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong." Garrett stepped forward again, playing mediator. "Dad, we're family. We need to talk about this, about what happened, about moving forward." "Forward to what?" Marlowe asked. Garrett glanced at the house, at the well-maintained property, at the expensive windows and the new roof Marlowe had hired someone to install. "Forward to making sure you're taken care of," Garrett said carefully. "That you have what you need. That you're safe." "We are safe," Marlowe said. "We don't need anything from you." Monica finally spoke up. Her voice was sharp. "Dad, be reasonable. You're 78 years old, living in the middle of nowhere. What happens if you fall? If you get sick? What happens when you can't take care of yourselves anymore?" "We'll figure it out," Marlowe said. "The way we figured out how to survive after your sister abandoned us." "That's not fair," Monica snapped. "Fair?" Marlowe's voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? Your mother and I gave you everything. We refinanced our house for Derek's business. We took Monica in for 18 months. We loaned Quincy $35,000. We sold our camper, our furniture, our wedding china. We gave you our whole lives." His voice cracked. "And when we had nothing left to give, when we needed help, you threw us away like garbage." The silence that followed was crushing. One of the grandchildren, a teenager Marlowe barely recognized, started crying. Her mother pulled her back toward the car. Quincy stepped forward, mascara running down her face. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I was drowning, Daddy. Preston's restaurant failed. We were going to lose the house. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have talked to us," Althea said from the porch. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You could have been honest, but instead you pretended to take us on a trip and you left us to die." "I didn't think you'd die," Quincy protested. "I called the shelters. I made sure they had space." "You gave us $300 in October in the mountains," Marlowe said. "The first snow came that night. If we hadn't found this house, we would have frozen." Quincy crumpled, fell to her knees right there in the driveway. "I'm sorry," she wailed. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please." Marlowe looked down at his youngest daughter, the baby he'd walked the floors with at night when she had colic, the little girl he'd taught to ride a bike, the young woman he'd walked down the aisle, and all he felt was tired. Derek stepped forward, his face hard. "Enough with the drama," he said. "Let's talk about what's really going on here." He gestured at the house. "Garrett told us you own this place, that it's legally yours. This property has to be worth millions. And you're living here alone, hoarding it, while the rest of us struggle?" Marlowe's eyes narrowed. "Hoarding it?" Derek crossed his arms. "We're your family. We should be helping each other. If you have resources, you should share them." "Like you shared with us?" Marlowe asked. "Like you helped when we needed it?" "That's different," Derek said. "How?" "So did we," Marlowe said. "And we did it on a carpenter's salary and a librarian's wages. We didn't have millions, we didn't have safety nets. We had each other and we made it work. Times are different now, Monica interjected. Are they? Marlowe asked. Or are you just more entitled? Garrett held up his hands. Okay, everyone calm down. We're getting off track. He looked at Marlowe. Dad, we're not here to fight. We're here because we love you, because we want to make things right. And yes, because we want to help. Help? Marlowe repeated. Garrett nodded. Help you manage this property. Help you figure out your finances. You can't do this alone. We're not alone, Althea said. She stepped down from the porch, stood beside Marlowe. We have each other. And we have help from people who actually care about us. What people? Monica demanded. People you've never met, Marlowe said. People who don't want anything from us except to see us happy. The children exchanged glances, calculating looks. You hired lawyers, Garrett said. Didn't you? We protected ourselves, Marlowe confirmed. From what? Derek asked. From you, Marlowe said simply. The words landed like a bomb. Quincy stopped crying. Monica's mouth fell open. Derek's face flushed red. Garrett just stared. That's what you think of us? Garrett asked quietly. That we're threats? You left us to die, Marlowe said. What else should we think? One of the spouses, Preston, Quincy's husband, finally spoke. This is ridiculous, he said. You're cutting off your whole family over one mistake. One mistake? Althea's voice shook with fury. You drove us up a mountain and left us with nothing. That's not a mistake. That's attempted murder. That's extreme, Preston said. Is it? Marlowe challenged. What would you call it? Preston didn't answer. Marlowe looked at each of his children in turn. Garrett with his false concern. Monica with her entitlement. Derek with his anger. Quincy with her crocodile tears. These were his children, his blood, and he barely recognized them. You want to know what we're doing with this house? Marlowe asked. You want to know about the money? The children leaned forward. Finally, the truth they'd come for. We started a foundation, Marlowe said, to help elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. Confusion crossed their faces. We've helped nearly 90 families in 3 months, Althea added. People just like us, people whose children threw them away. You're giving away your money? Monica asked, incredulous. It's not our money, Marlowe said. We didn't earn it. We found it. And we're using it the way it was meant to be used. He stepped closer to his children. Every dollar we give away is a dollar you won't inherit. Every family we help is a reminder that we don't need you, that we're better off without you. The silence was absolute. Then Derek exploded. This is insane, he shouted. You're giving millions to strangers while your own family struggles. Our family is struggling because you made bad choices, Marlowe shot back. That's not our responsibility anymore. Yes, it is, Derek yelled. We're your children. Then act like it, Marlowe roared. His voice echoed off the trees. Birds scattered from nearby branches. Act like children who love their parents, Marlowe continued, not like vultures circling a carcass. You want our help? Earn it. Show us you care about more than money. Show us you remember we're human beings who gave you life. He was breathing hard, his hands shaking. Until then, stay away from us. Stay away from this house, and don't come back unless you can look us in the eye and mean it when you say you're sorry. Garrett opened his mouth to argue. Marlowe cut him off. Leave, now. But Dad? Garrett started. Now, Marlowe repeated. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Garrett turned and walked to his truck. The others followed slowly, reluctantly. Quincy was the last to go. She stood there, sobbing, reaching toward Marlowe. Daddy, please. Marlowe's heart cracked, but he didn't move. Please leave, he said quietly. Quincy crumpled again. Preston had to help her to the van. They drove away in a convoy, engines starting, gravel crunching, one by one disappearing down the driveway. Marlowe and Althea stood on the porch watching until the last car was gone. Then Althea collapsed into his arms and wept. That night they couldn't eat, couldn't talk, just sat by the fire holding each other, feeling the weight of what they'd done. "We just cut off our children," Althea whispered. "We protected ourselves," Marlowe corrected. "There's a difference." But his voice lacked conviction, because no matter how justified, no matter how necessary, it hurt. God, it hurt. "Do you think any of them meant it?" Althea asked. "The apologies?" Marlowe thought carefully. "I think they meant they were sorry they got caught, sorry their plan didn't work, but sorry for what they did, for the pain they caused." He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." The phone rang the next morning. Marlowe ignored it. It rang again and again. Finally, he answered. "Mr. Brennan, this is Sterling Huxley. I received some interesting calls this morning." "From who?" "From 3 different law firms," Sterling said, "all claiming to represent your children. All threatening legal action if you don't agree to mediation." Marlowe's stomach dropped. "Legal action?" "They're claiming elder abuse," Sterling explained, "saying you're not mentally competent, that someone has unduly influenced you against your family. That's insane." "I know," Sterling said calmly, "and I've already filed counter-motions, frivolous lawsuits, harassment. I've also sent cease and desist letters to all 3 firms." He paused. "They're scared," Sterling continued. "They realize you have money and they have no legal claim to it, so they're trying to bully you into giving them access. Will it work?" "Not a chance," Sterling said firmly. "You're mentally sound. You made clear, documented decisions, and you have witnesses, including me, who can testify that you're acting of your own free will." Marlowe felt some of the tension ease. Marlowe smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you. Thaddeus would have wanted this," Sterling said. "He'd be proud of how you're handling it." After he hung up, Marlowe told Althea what Sterling had said. "They're trying to declare us incompetent," he said. "Can you believe that?" Althea laughed. It was a harsh sound. "We survive being abandoned, find a house, start a foundation that's helped nearly 100 families. And we're incompetent?" Marlowe shook his head. "They're desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. What do? "We keep going," Marlowe said. "We keep helping people. We keep living our lives. And we don't let them bully us." Althea nodded. Then she pulled up the foundation website. "We have 37 new applications," she said. Marlowe sat beside her. "Let's get to work." Over the next month, the legal threats continued. Letters from lawyers, attempts at mediation, even a visit from Adult Protective Services, called by an anonymous tip that claimed Marlowe and Althea were being exploited. The social worker who came was a kind woman named Patricia. She interviewed them separately, toured the house, reviewed their medical records and financial statements. At the end, she sat with them in the living room. "Whoever called this in was lying," she said bluntly. "You 2 are sharp as tacks. Your home is immaculate. You're financially secure. You have medical care. And frankly, you're doing better than most people half your age." She closed her notebook. "I'm required to file a report, but it's going to say there's no cause for concern. And if someone calls again, I'll note it as harassment." After she left, Marlowe pulled Althea close. "They're not going to stop," he said. "Then neither will we," she replied. But the attacks were taking a toll. Marlowe wasn't sleeping well. Althea had developed a stress rash. They jumped every time a car came down the driveway. "We can't live like this," Althea said one evening, "constantly waiting for the next attack." Marlowe agreed. "But what's the alternative? Give in? Hand them money just to buy peace?" "No," Althea said firmly. "But maybe we need to make a statement. Something public. Something that makes our position clear." Marlowe thought about it, then nodded slowly. The next day, he called a local newspaper. A small publication, but legitimate. He offered them an exclusive interview. The reporter, a young woman named Cordelia, arrived 2 days later. She was smart, thorough, and genuinely interested in their story. They told her everything: the abandonment, the house, the foundation, the harassment from their children. Cordelia took notes, asked careful questions, and at the end looked up with tears in her eyes. "This is going to resonate with a lot of people," she said. "Elder abandonment is more common than most realize, and the fact that you're using your resources to help others, that's beautiful." The article ran the following Sunday, front page, with a photo of Marlowe and Althea on the porch of the manor. The headline read, "Abandoned by family, couple creates foundation to help other forgotten elders." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails poured in, hundreds of them. People sharing their own stories of being abandoned, people offering support, people wanting to donate to the foundation. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional. Within a week, national outlets were calling. Marlowe and Althea declined most interviews. They didn't want fame, but they agreed to a few, carefully chosen. Programs that focused on elder rights, shows that highlighted social issues. And with each interview, they made their position clear. They weren't interested in reconciling with children who only wanted money. They were interested in helping people who needed dignity. The publicity had an unexpected effect. It shamed their children into silence. No more legal threats. No more calls. Just quiet. Marlowe knew they were still out there, still angry, still waiting. But for now, they'd backed off. Months passed. Summer arrived in the mountains. The forest turned lush and green. Wildflowers bloomed in meadows. The manor, once a tomb of secrets, became a home filled with purpose. The foundation grew. They hired more staff, opened a second office, helped over 300 families. Pearl, the woman from the bus station, came to visit. She was healthy, happy, thriving. She hugged Marlowe and Althea for a long time. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Not just with money, with dignity, with proof that someone cared." "You saved ours too," Althea told her. Because it was true. Helping others had helped them heal. Each family they assisted was a reminder that they weren't alone. That abandonment wasn't a death sentence, that there was life after betrayal. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Marlowe turned to Althea. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Cutting them off?" Althea was quiet for a long time. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "I regret that we raised children who valued money over parents. But do I regret protecting us, protecting our dignity?" She shook her head. "No, never." Thaddeus was right, he said. "Money reveals character, theirs and ours." He looked out at the forest, at the life they'd built from nothing. We could have become bitter, could have hoarded everything, could have spent the rest of our lives angry and alone. But we didn't. We chose different. And that, Althea said, makes all the difference. A year after they'd found the house, Sterling came to visit. He brought news. "The foundation has gotten attention," he said. "Significant attention. There's a senator who wants to use your model to draft federal legislation protecting elderly people from financial abuse." Marlowe blinked. "Federal legislation?" Sterling smiled. "You've helped 347 families. You've exposed a systemic problem. Politicians are paying attention." He pulled out a folder. "There's more. Several wealthy donors have reached out. They want to contribute to the foundation. Anonymously. People who were moved by your story and want to help." "How much?" Althea asked. Sterling opened the folder, showed them numbers. $38 million in pledged donations so far. Marlowe stared at the numbers. When he'd opened that safe, he'd never imagined this. Never imagined that one couple's story could ripple outward and create real change. "Thaddeus would be proud," Sterling said softly. "I hope so," Marlowe replied, because that had become his measure of success. Not how much money they had, not how many people knew their names, but whether they were honoring the gift they'd been given, using it to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm. One afternoon in late autumn, Marlowe was working in the garden when a single car pulled up the driveway. He tensed, reached for his phone, ready to call Sterling if needed. But the person who got out wasn't one of his children. It was one of his grandchildren, Emma, Garrett's daughter. She was 23 now, a young woman Marlowe barely knew. She walked toward him slowly, hands in her pockets. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. Marlowe wiped dirt from his hands. "Emma," she looked nervous, uncomfortable. "I know I'm probably not welcome," she started. Marlowe waited. "But I needed to see you, to talk to you without my dad knowing." "Why?" Emma took a deep breath. "Because I'm ashamed. Of all of them. Of what they did to you. What they're still trying to do." Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't know about the abandonment until I read the article. No one told me. And when I confronted my dad, he made excuses. Said you were exaggerating. Said you'd become greedy." Marlowe's jaw clenched. "But I didn't believe him," Emma continued. "So I did research, found the foundation, saw all the people you've helped, read their stories. You're heroes, both of you, and my family treated you like trash. I'm so sorry." Marlowe felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. This girl, this young woman, was different. She'd come alone, without agenda, with genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. Emma nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive them. I wouldn't. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with what happened." She pulled an envelope from her pocket. "I've been saving money. It's not much, $2,000, but I want to donate it to your foundation. In your honor." Marlowe's throat tightened. He took the envelope. "You don't have to do this." "I want to," Emma said. "It's the least I can do." They stood there for a moment. Grandfather and granddaughter, strangers and family, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. "Would you like to stay for tea?" Marlowe asked. Emma smiled through tears. "I'd love that." They walked to the house together. Althea was surprised to see Emma, but she welcomed her in. They sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, talking carefully about safe things. Emma's job, her apartment, her life. But eventually, the conversation turned. "Dad says you're punishing them," Emma said. "Making them suffer." "We're protecting ourselves," Marlowe corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at her seriously. "When someone hurts you, you have two choices. You can let them keep hurting you, or you can create boundaries. We chose boundaries." "Family doesn't abandon each other," Althea said firmly. "Family doesn't leave people to die and then come back demanding money." Emma nodded slowly. "Fair point." She set down her tea. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. The foundation, the boundaries, all of it." She smiled sadly. "And maybe someday, when they've actually changed, when they've proven they're sorry through actions, not words, maybe then there can be reconciliation. But not before." Marlowe felt tears prick his eyes. This girl understood, really understood. "You're wise beyond your years," he said. Emma laughed. "I learned from the best, even if I didn't know it at the time." She left an hour later. Marlowe and Althea stood on the porch, waving as she drove away. "That's what we were hoping for," Althea said. "For one of them to understand." 2 years after finding the house, Marlowe and Althea stood in a conference room in Washington, D.C. They'd been invited to testify before a Senate committee about elder abandonment and financial abuse. The room was intimidating. Senators at a raised desk, cameras everywhere, people in suits taking notes. But Marlowe wasn't afraid anymore. He told their story, clearly, honestly, without embellishment. Told about being left on a mountain, about finding the house, about starting the foundation, about helping over 700 families now. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one senator, an older woman with kind eyes, spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, Your courage in sharing this story has already changed lives. The legislation we're proposing, the Elder Protection Act, will make what happened to you illegal. We'll give abandoned elderly people legal recourse. We'll create federal funding for support services. She paused. You've turned your tragedy into transformation. On behalf of this committee, thank you. The hearing ended. They walked out into the hallway. Sterling was waiting, beaming. You've just changed federal policy, he said. Do you understand that? Marlowe looked at Althea. They'd come so far, from abandoned, forgotten parents to advocates for thousands, from victims to victors. We did what Thaddeus hoped, Marlowe said. We used the gift well. 3 years after finding the house, Marlowe woke to the sound of birds. Spring again. The forest renewing itself. He got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Althea. But she was already awake, watching him with a smile. Good morning, she said. Good morning. They'd established a morning routine, coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise, checking foundation emails together, simple rhythms that felt sacred. Today was their 56th wedding anniversary. Marlowe had planned something special, a picnic by the small lake on the property. Nothing fancy, sandwiches and lemonade, but time together, uninterrupted, perfect. They spent the morning in comfortable silence, reading, working, being. At noon they walked to the lake. Marlowe had set up a blanket and a basket. The water was glass smooth, reflecting clouds. They ate slowly, talked about everything and nothing, remembered their wedding day in 1971. How young they'd been, how poor, how happy. Best investment I ever made, Marlowe replied. She laughed. They'd laughed more in the last 3 years than they had in the previous 20. The weight they'd carried, of failure, of being burdens, had lifted, replaced with purpose and peace. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Quincy hadn't abandoned us? Marlowe asked. Althea thought carefully. We'd probably still be in her basement, still feeling like we didn't matter, still giving pieces of ourselves away until there was nothing left. She looked at him. What she did was cruel, but it freed us, forced us to become people we'd forgotten we could be. Marlowe nodded. He'd thought the same thing. The abandonment had been traumatic, but it had also been necessary, a violent push out of complacency into purpose. I forgive her, Althea said quietly. And the others. Not because they've earned it, but because I don't want to carry the anger anymore. Marlowe was surprised. You forgive them? I forgive them, she repeated. But I don't trust them, and I won't let them back in. Those are different things. Marlowe understood. Forgiveness was releasing the poison. Trust had to be earned, and his children hadn't earned it. Maybe someday, he said. Maybe, Althea agreed, but not today. They sat by the lake until the sun began to set, gold and orange painting the sky, the forest alive with evening sounds. Marlowe pulled out a small box. I got you something, he said. Althea opened it. Inside was a simple necklace, a silver pendant shaped like a house. She looked at him, eyes wet. Because you gave me a home, Marlowe said. Not the house, the feeling, the knowing that wherever you are, I belong. Althea put it on. The silver caught the light. I love you, she said. They'd said those words thousands of times over 56 years, but they'd never meant more than they did right now. As darkness fell, they walked back to the manor, lights glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Not because of the money, not because of the foundation, but because they'd chosen each other, had fought for each other, had refused to let the world make them small. It was Pearl, calling to tell them she'd gotten engaged. To a man she'd met at a senior center the foundation had helped fund. They were happy, she said. Finally, wonderfully happy. Marlowe hung up and told Althea. She clapped her hands together. That's wonderful. Another ripple, Marlowe said. Another life changed, Althea added. They'd lost count of how many families they'd helped, how many lives they'd touched. The foundation was bigger than them now, had taken on a life of its own. But every person they helped was a reminder. That pain could become purpose. That loss could become legacy. That even at 78 and 76 years old, they could still make a difference. One evening, Sterling called with news. "Thaddeus contacted me," he said. Marlowe nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "He's alive, living in Thailand, teaching. He heard about the foundation, about what you've done with his gift." He paused. "He wanted me to tell you thank you, said the house chose well." Marlowe felt tears run down his face. "Tell him we're honored," Marlowe said. "Tell him his gift changed everything." After hanging up, Marlowe went to the library, pulled out Thaddeus's journal, read the final entry again. The house will choose its own owner, someone who understands that home isn't about walls, it's about worth, someone who knows that wealth means nothing if you're poor in spirit. I hope whoever finds this place builds something beautiful, not just a house, a life. Marlowe closed the journal, set it gently on the shelf. They had built something beautiful, not just for themselves, for hundreds of others. And the building wasn't done, would never be done, because that was the nature of purpose. It kept growing, kept reaching, kept mattering. 4 years after being abandoned, Marlowe and Althea sat on their porch. Autumn again, the forest painted in gold. In it, he apologized, really apologized. Not for getting caught, not for looking bad, but for failing them, for choosing comfort over character, for being selfish when they needed him most. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask for reconciliation, just acknowledged his failures and said he was sorry. Marlowe set the letter down. "It's a start," he said. "It is," Althea agreed. They didn't call him, didn't write back yet, needed time to sit with it, to see if actions followed words. But for the first time in 4 years, Marlowe felt something shift. Not forgiveness yet, not trust, but possibility. Maybe someday the distance between them could shrink. Maybe someday there could be healing. But only if his children proved they'd changed. Only if they showed through years of consistent behavior that they understood what they'd destroyed and were committed to rebuilding it. Until then, Marlowe and Althea would keep living, keep building, keep helping others find the dignity that had been stolen from them. Because that was what the money was for, what the house was for, what their survival had been for. Not to make them rich, but to make them rich in the things that actually mattered: purpose, peace, the knowledge that they'd taken something broken and made it whole. Anyone can change the world if they refuse to stay small. If they take their pain and transform it into power. If they remember that wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with what you've been given. As the sun set over the Cascade Mountains, Marlowe reached for Althea's hand. She squeezed back, and in that touch was everything. 56 years of love, 4 years of rebuilding, a lifetime of choosing each other. They'd been abandoned before winter, left to freeze, left to die. Instead, they'd found shelter, found fortune, found purpose, and in doing so, they'd reminded the world that some people don't just survive tragedy, they transform it. Because for Marlowe and Althea Brennan, the story that began with abandonment had become a story of redemption, of resilience, of refusing to let cruelty have the final word. The safe hadn't just held $390 million, it had held possibility. The possibility that forgotten people could matter again, that elderly lives had value, that love could outlast betrayal, and that sometimes the best way to heal from being thrown away is to prove you were always worth keeping. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe dignity has no expiration date and that it's never too late to build something beautiful from broken pieces.